Now, sometimes I ask questions during Sunday school, and sometimes there's a lot of interaction. Well, there really isn't. So here's what we're going to do to start prime the pumps, okay? The beginning part of our Sunday school time this morning, I'm going to ask some Bible trivia questions that I want you to take some time to write down some answers, and then in a few minutes we'll come together and answer them, and then we'll go through our lesson, and we'll have a good time with interaction there. So look at your handouts if you have one, and I encourage you to use a writing utensil to answer the questions. And we'll go through them briefly here, not giving the answers yet. We'll come back to that in a second here. First question is, which Bible character or characters was elevated to being the second most powerful person in an ancient non-Jewish kingdom? So if you can think of one or two or more or whatever answers to this question, go ahead and write them down as you're thinking through that. No one in the divided kingdoms or in David or Solomon or King Saul's kingdom would qualify here, but this is specifically for Jewish individual Bible characters, I should say. Bible characters were elevated to the second most powerful person in an ancient non-Jewish kingdom. So, as you're working on that one, think through that. Second question, as you're continuing to work through those, which well-known Bible character or characters got into a lot of trouble for not bowing where. Sorry about the typos in that question. Or where their non-Jewish king commanded. So which Bible characters, well-known Bible characters, got in trouble for not bowing when or where their non-Jewish king commanded them to bow? The third question, I know, just take your time going through. I'll give you a few minutes because I will want some interaction. This is priming the pump for interaction. Which significant Bible character or characters has a much more famous cousin than this Bible character? Which Bible character has a much more famous cousin than this person's own self? And finally, the fourth question, which Bible character or characters is described as being beautiful of form and of face? It's a particular phrase, at least in the New American Standard, that's used several times. There are many beautiful, handsome, remarkable individuals, but there's one or more characters described as being beautiful of form and of face. So we're going to go through these questions here, but take some time to write down in your own handouts there some of your answers for letters A through D. And in a minute here, I'll beseech you for some of your answers there. So take a few more minutes here to work through some of those questions. Josiah, you got all the answers written down already, ready to go? I can't wait to see your handout when I look at it later to see all the writing you've done, so that's good. Sorry. I can point out my own son for that one, so. But I may be calling on you all, I don't know, because one of the things, sometimes people volunteer, other times it's to be voluntold to do things. So volunteer or voluntold. Okay. I'd love to give you another minute or two, and we're still trying to feverishly work through things. Okay, give you another minute here. I had a lot of fun coming up with these questions, by the way. Bible trivia. We in youth group we do Bible trivia sometimes. It's a lot of fun, and so I enjoy it greatly. So we'll give you one more minute. when you actually look at your watch for a minute, it takes a little longer when there's silence. So we've got 30 seconds left here. 30 more seconds. Priming the pump, getting us thinking. If you have coffee, I suppose you could have gone to get a little coffee or something if you needed some. I should have said that before. My apologies. Too late now. You can't. Okay, let's just see if we can answer a couple of these questions here. For number one, letter A there, who's got at least one character? Don't give all the answers you have. Someone raise you if you have more than one. Somebody give me one of the characters you have for that answer. Noah, who's one of the characters you have? Esther. Okay, Esther. Okay, who else is an answer? Stephanie. Joseph. Okay. All right. Any other answers? Megan. Haman. Now that's true. He was elevated, but I would say that's a fair. Haman is a good answer. I should have been more specific. I was looking for Hebrew or Jewish people, so Haman qualifies, although not what I was looking for. They're pretty good. Somebody else? I will say Esther is not a correct answer. It's a good guess. Though she's queen, she had no real authority. So we have Joseph and we have Haman as an answer for biblical characters elevated to being the second most powerful in an ancient non-Jewish kingdom. Any other answers? Anyone else want to hazard a guess? We'll come. Oh, Marion? Daniel. Also, I would say Joseph and Daniel were the two answers I was expecting to hear this morning. Okay, very good. Any other answers before we move on to next question? I was surprised by Haman. That was great. So that was okay. Second question there. Which well-known Bible character or characters got in a lot of trouble for not bowing when or where their non-Jewish king commanded them? Who had an answer for number two? Daniel. Daniel's friends. Do you remember their names, Daniel? That's okay. Can anyone help Daniel with some names? Okay, we got Nathan. Shadrach. And Abednego. Those are their new names. What are their old names? I remember their old names. Ooh, trivia. Noah. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Okay, so we have those three young men got in trouble for not bowing when or where their non-Jewish king commanded. You know, got any other answers? Megan? Mordecai. Good answer, Mordecai. I was wondering if you come up with that because you came up with Haman in the previous one. Mordecai got in trouble for not bowing when he was supposed to. He's supposed to bow to who? Haman. There you go. Okay, there you go. All right. Very good. Any other answers to the questions? You're doing great so far. Okay, the third question. Which significant Bible character or characters has a much more famous cousin? John the Baptist is an answer. Okay, Noah? Mordecai. Who was Mordecai's cousin? Okay. Ooh. We'll put her on there, or him on there, even though you're not sure if she's a cousin or niece. Okay. Okay. Any other answers? Daniel. Lot. Okay, Lot. Now his uncle was Abraham. Close. Okay, that's fine. Very good. Touche. Lot works. Lot works. And actually, John the Baptist He's referred to often, I think, in general as Jesus' cousin, but I don't know if we actually are given the specific relation. Elizabeth and Mary were close relatives. So what that could have meant, cousins or other kinds of close kin. But the question is that one I have as a question mark. Others that I've heard, and when I test ballooned these questions, someone brought up Joab, because David and his situation there, but Joab was actually David's nephew, not cousin. The only actual cousin in that lot, other than Lot, was Mordecai and Esther, because Mordecai and Esther, Esther's parents were the brother, or both their parents were siblings. So finally then, D, which Bible character or characters is described as being beautiful of form and of face? Any answers for this one? Okay, Julie. Esther is there. Okay, is listed there. So did I steal your answer there, Megan? Okay, okay. I guessed that, and I was going with somebody else. So okay. Anybody else? Any other? Nancy. David. Okay, he was ruddy, I believe, in appearance. He's not described as beautiful form and face. Stephanie. Rachel. Yes. Rachel. Leah her eyes were weak. Rachel was beautiful of form and face. Okay. Any other answers? This last one, there's one more. There are other individuals who are mentioned as being, striking for their appearance, but there's one more listed in this way, a beautiful form and face. Julie. Sarah, no, she was very beautiful. This might throw you for a loop here. Saul was a head taller. He stood out. He had various things to draw attention to himself. Noah. Abel, no. I love the way you answer that. No, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Good try. Actually, Joseph. Joseph is, and this was a little tricky because the same Hebrew language is used, but the word is translated appearance instead of face in Genesis chapter 39. So Joseph, Rachel, and Esther. Now, there was a couple of things I want to come back to on these answers here. You did actually very, very well. And the only one I would add to the answers is number one of the Bible characters elevated to being the second most powerful person in the ancient non-Jewish kingdom is Mordecai. Esther's cousin, who acted as a surrogate father for her until she was taken, and even throughout the time she was in the harem and then as queen. Mordecai, at the end of the story of Esther, was elevated to being the second most powerful ruler in all of the Persian Empire. So the theme of my Bible questions, my trivia questions, was to focus on the person of Mordecai. Mordecai was a person who was raised to prominence in an ancient non-Jewish kingdom. He got in trouble from his contemporaries for not bowing to another official who the king had commanded be paid homage to. His significant, close cousin is more famous than him, even has a book of the Bible written about her, a description of her life. And she is noted for her beauty of form and of face. So the story, the character study this morning, I want to look at a little bit of the story of Mordecai. Mordecai is the character that I want to look at primarily because, well, I've been just in love with the book of Esther for the past couple of years, and so I just wanted an excuse to look into that book, and I thought we can have it be interesting and look at Mordecai first, and then focus on Esther at a later time. But the story of Esther is very simply, if you want to, actually, can someone summarize the story of Esther for me, the problem and the conflict and the resolution of this story? You want to summarize that for me this morning? Noah.
The king Ben's wife, his wife, his official wife called Ben Esther made her beautiful part of the king. King found out that she was very beautiful, then took her as his wife. And then he didn't know she was Jewish, and after a while, when Haman made the plot to kill all the Jews, independent people, then Haman being killed as well.
That's a very good summary of the book of Esther, the general plot lines there. And one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on Mordecai is because he is kind of the behind-the-scenes character who helps to both protect, direct Esther in her activities, challenges her significantly for her faithfulness to God, and then is ultimately raised to a position of prominence inside of the kingdom. Mordecai, he is the son of a man named Jair. He's a Benjamite. He's in the beginning of Esther. He's described as being the son of Jair, of Shimei, of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, I think in that is not a comment going back through primarily referring to Kish as in Saul's father Kish, but I think as is the habit in many times in Jewish history and Jewish lineage, that famous children named for famous ancestors. If you follow the lineage of Jesus going back to David, there'll be several kind of iterations of similar names. And Esther's lineage, her father is Abihail, Mordecai's uncle. Anyone remember what Esther's given name was? Esther was her maybe her Persian name, but anyone remember her given name? Noah? Hadassah is her given name. Correct. So we have Mordecai, a Jew from Benjamin, and then by, again, I think connection there that Esther would have been from the line of Benjamin as well, the tribe of Benjamin as well. And he cares for Esther when her parents died. According to Esther chapter 2, because chapter 1 is the discussion of the Vashti's kind of demotion in the court of Persia, and which is an interesting story we won't get into primarily this morning. But her disrespect she showed publicly for the king was the concern of all the nobles. Well, this could get out of hand, so we need to kind of nip this in the bud, is essentially kind of what his nobles said. But in Esther chapter 2, verse 7, this is speaking of Mordecai, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So we have at the beginning here this introduction to Esther, that she is orphaned but also cared for by her uncle, or by her cousin, who cares and watches over her. And one of the things you'll see through the story, throughout the entirety of her time, before and during the whole being one of first a concubine, then the queen of the king, Mordecai is caring for her and watching out for her. Now he faithfully walked with her, and even after she's taken into the harem, in Exodus, my abbreviations, I'm skipping over them there. In Esther 2, it says that he faithfully walked in front of the court to learn of Esther's condition while she was in the harem. So when Esther is taken in, because she's beautiful, to this royal edict, he instructs her to keep your Jewish lineage a secret. We have this understanding of potential, the reality of anti-Semitism in that time, which shouldn't surprise us nowadays. Even thousands of years later, anti-Semitism is a significant problem. But he instructs her to keep that secret, not out of shame, I don't believe, but probably out of just trying to be careful in life in the court of the king. Now, in verse 20, it says that in Esther chapter 2, it says this: Esther had not yet made known the kingdom of her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So even when Esther becomes queen, she still reveres in a proper fatherly way the advice and counsel of Mordecai for how she should behave. This is, I think, a great testimony of her character, but also of his influence. This is this kind of reciprocal statement of these individuals. And while this was going on while she spent that year in the custody of the harem, well, I suppose the pre-harem, because she's transferred to the harem after she spends the night with the king, he walks back and forth in the court to learn of her care. So he was constantly in the area of the royal palace, the royal residence, wanting to hear and learn of Esther's condition. Now, it's in this particular situation, I believe, which providentially Mordecai becomes aware of some difficult or some plots against the king. And this will become obviously significant in the larger story of Esther. If you can think of the image here, Mordecai is roaming back and forth, waiting for messages, wanting to hear of how Esther's doing. And as he's there day in and day out, he becomes aware of the players, of the people at the gate. Now, I don't think that the two individuals, Bigthan and, what are their names here? Bigthan and Teresh, were sitting around one day joking about how they're going to go in and kill the king, like out in the open, just speaking that he just happened to hear it and say, ooh, I'm going to go tell the king. I think the picture is this larger kind of clandestine conspiracy to kill the king that over this course of time, Mordecai became aware of because of his presence in the gate, in the place where these individuals were, who guarded the door. And he became aware of these things, and he made it known to the king. So as he's present, as he's watching out for news from his cousin, his daughter, I mean, we can speak of her that way, I think, because that's how he treated her. That's the relationship they had. That wasn't their lineagical connection, but it was their familial relationship, their actual interaction. He was waiting for information on her. He found about this plot, and he informed the king. Verse 22, the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther. And Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. So we have this plot being made known by the queen to the king. And that is where that sits. She informs him in Mordecai's name, so that both of those conspirators were hanged, and this was marked down in the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Again, an important piece of the story for later on, how the entire downfall of Haman and the rise of Mordecai come to pass. This is Mordecai's noteworthy deed, which he did because he was just there and I think looking out for the best interests of the kingdom. Remember when the people from Judah were taken into captivity, Jeremiah says to the people, when you're there, build houses, take wives, look out for the benefit, look for the blessing of the city in which you are. And so Mordecai was not looking for an overthrow of the Persian Empire or of the king, but he was living there. He was acting as a good citizen now of the king, similar to Daniel had done as a good citizen in the new in the new nation he was a part of. And so he informed him, and that was noted by the king in this instance. Now, after this happens, we are introduced to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and he established him over all the princes who were with him. So again, we have, as Megan rightly pointed out, Haman was elevated to the primary counselor, the single most prominent official in the government underneath the king himself. Now, a couple things about, if you look at verse 1, about his identity, what sticks out there? What is important to think about the identity of Haman? It's Esther 3, verse 1. Stephanie.
He's an Agagite.
Agagite. What does that mean? What does that mean? Why is that significant?
He's of the family of Agag, who was hacked to pieces, following the instruction of the Lord that was given previously to annihilate the entire nation. But Saul did not obey.
Correct. Saul was told to wipe out the Amalekites. Agag was the king. Saul spared Agag. And Samuel comes in and Saul says, hey, we followed the commands of the Lord. And Samuel says, one of my favorite lines, then what is the bleating of sheep in my ears? Why are there still these animals alive? And then after this interaction and he confronts Saul, he takes a sword and it says hacks him to pieces. Hacks Agag to pieces. Noah. He was a greedy and ambitious man. He was definitely ambitious for sure. But I think the primary connection here is he was the descendant of Agag. And what do we know about Mordecai? Mordecai is a descendant of whom? I think if we trace the name and the lineage there, descendant of who? He's Kish, a Benjamite. Who else was of Kish, a Benjamite? Saul was of Kish, a Benjamite. So we have, in some ways, and some theologians will, some commentators will say, you'll see the foreshadowing of the downfall of Agag or of Haman in this. That I suppose if you've read the entire story, you see that. But I think you at least see the roots of bitterness and of animosity going back generations between Haman and Mordecai, between the one who dispossessed a man of his kingdom and the one who was dispossessed. So you have this unique situation here where Haman is elevated. It said, verse 2, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. So the king, I mean, as happened, if you look back at the story of Joseph or of Daniel, when there's an elevated person in the kingdom, all people are to recognize this and pay homage. So Mordecai is given the command that every other person is also, and because he's at the gate, he happens to be around Haman, at least in his presence, more than most Jews would have been in this city, and he refused. He neither bowed down nor paid homage. Now notice this is a persistent thing, so there would have been this interaction. Verse 3, it said, the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? So it was verse 4, and that was, now when they had spoken daily to him and he would not listen to them, they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So you have this picture of this repeated, kind of, hey, Mordecai, just bow to Haman. Why aren't you doing this day in and day out? And Mordecai's answer essentially boiled down to, I can't, I'm a Jew. Now, this, I think, would go back to, again, the history that would have been maybe well or lesser known, but we know it from our Bible history of Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael's refusal to bow down before the idol the king had made. That Daniel, though he bowed in his own room, was not going to bow and petition to the king, though that was the command for 30 days. That was always the plot to get him, but the point was, I can't bow in the way that I'm supposed to bow to this nobleman here because I'm a Jew. And there may or may not have been some religious understanding of some of these kingdoms back in these days, these empires, had some latitude in various cultures for different religious expressions. So there may have been a carve out for the Jews to a certain extent, or at least some kind of understandable desire for an exception. But either way, Haman saw that and he was filled with rage, verse 5. So this is what I call his infamous deed, as far as Mordecai's infamous deed. He became so well known for his infamy in not bowing down that Haman wanted to kill him outright. And not just kill him, but annihilate all the Jews. Haman's in a position of power, he's in a position of influence and authority, that this affront must be met with the appropriate and long-standing results that go back to when Saul took Agag out of his kingdom. So yeah, likely, in my opinion, there was some kind of religious exception or exemption that Mordecai was essentially saying, I'm not doing that, and furthermore, I'm just not going to. But it enraged Haman. So Mordecai had this interaction, and Haman then begins his plot. And again, similar to the plot against the Jews, well, plot against others in the scriptures, but Haman then goes to the king and says, basically, I'll give you all this money, I'll put it into the royal treasury, if you allow me to send out letters so we can annihilate these people who are not doing what they ought to do in your kingdom. And the king, knowing no more than this, says, the silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please. So the king said, go for it. He says, because Haman had described the Jews as a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples of your provinces. Their laws are different from those of all the other people, and they did not observe the king's laws. It's in the king's interest not to let them remain. So Haman has this very political polished, hey, it's good for the kingdom if they go away. And the king says, okay. Trusting his advisor, trusting his chief administrator, he says to go and do that. Now, it's at this point that Mordecai learns of this plot. Now, his initial response was weeping and lamentation. If you look at verse 1 of chapter 4, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city and walked or wailed loudly and bitterly. Mordecai, and probably not alone, probably not singularly, I'm sure this was a general response from those who heard and learned of their imminent demise, legal execution and extermination. He wept loudly. And again, in verse 3, we see it in the larger kingdom. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. So this is, again, Mordecai's response is the response of Jews in general, but he is, again, prominent because of his position geographically, but also in his position related to the queen. Now, what's interesting here is Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. Now, I believe right away, Esther doesn't really know, I don't think, maybe what the edict was. Because later, Mordecai sends word back with the edict, and it's read to her. I think her anguish probably is significantly over just the great despair of Mordecai. What in the world could be causing Mordecai to have this extreme response in sorrow? Again, whether she writhes in great anguish because of Mordecai's mourning alone, and without any knowledge of the decree, or because she knew of the decree and saw her cousin's anguish, it's difficult to say for certain, but I do believe that I don't think she had any knowledge of it up until this point, or at this point. When he's asked by Esther's emissaries, Hathach, to go and find out, order him to go to Mordecai, verse 5, to learn what this was and why it was. Now, again, whether that means what the exact edict was and why it was, or why just what his concerns were and why he was overly upset by what he's seeing, he goes and finds out, and then in response, Mordecai informs Esther of the exact order and details of the order itself, even sends her a copy of it. And what's interesting here, again, noting the relationship between Mordecai and Queen Esther, it says this. Verse 8, he gave her a copy of the text of the edict, which has been issued in Susa for the destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king and implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. He orders her, you need to go into the king and plead for your people. So Mordecai has this, again, his relationship with his cousin, his daughter, essentially. He orders her what to do. When she receives this knowledge, when she receives this information, she replies back and says, if I'm not summoned and I go to the king, what happens? What happens? You're dead. No one comes before the king unless they're summoned, because you don't know what the plot's going to be, so the king has to summon you. But look at, this is one of the most amazing, I think, interactions, and really I think it was this section here that really made me hold at the book of Esther in such a beloved position of late. Starting in verse 12, they related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So Mordecai challenges Esther with the providence knowledge that God will protect his people. God will deliver us somehow. And if you do no action, well then it's your loss specifically. And he challenges her. I think one of the lines that is probably most known in the book of Esther is referring to such a time as this. Then Esther responds, verse 16, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night and day. I and the maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to law. And if I perish, I perish. I see such a great connection there, a parallel between her response to this and that of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that of Daniel. If I perish, I perish. I will do this thing because it is right, and if I die, I die. And then look at verse 17. This just, I think, endears me to Mordecai again. It says, so Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Again, there is this love and respect in their relationship, and he does exactly what she says. So Mordecai does all this, and it's at this time in the story of Esther where her character is then more prominent. It's the meals and the intrigue to kind of put Haman on the spot to make him think that he's great, and the whole, which results in the king saying, after he learns of what Mordecai did for him, Haman, what should I do for the man the king wants to honor? What should be done for this man the king wants to honor? And Haman says, who does he want to honor more than me? So do all these things, have somebody else, another prince come and say, everybody bow down to this guy, praise this official, give him a royal coat, a royal steed, all these things. And the king says, do that for Mordecai, and you be the one who does all that. Man, that has got to be the worst kind of turnabout that not quite yet, but the worst turnabout that he could have imagined at that time. The very thing he was angry enough to kill all the Jews about because of Mordecai not bowing, not giving homage, now he has to do it to Mordecai in public in a procession. That has got to be, again, at this point in time, his worst nightmare come true. Almost. As we'll see, it can still get worse. Because as Esther continues to go on, Esther then relates to the king that actually Haman wants to kill us all. One of my favorite lines that Esther says, she said to the king, if it was just about enslaving our people, I wouldn't have troubled you for the annoyance that it brought you. But because he wants to annihilate us, this is a problem. And then she points out, a foe is this wicked Haman. And the three of them are in a room together, and Haman's face, I'm sure, just went white as a sheet. And he was apoplectic in his fear. And after Haman is then hanged on the gallows that he made for Mordecai to hang him on, the story continues that Mordecai receives recognition instead of a rope. He receives the recognition from the king instead of the rope. And he's promoted. And chapter 10, verses 1 to 3, describe him as being second to the king. And he and Esther together send out, in the name of the king, edicts or words to all the peoples. So the Jews have now the right to defend themselves and to then plunder the enemies that came after them. Because all these things that, again, together, Esther and Mordecai used, his new office, because Mordecai was given the house of Haman, that he had this ability to help spare the Jews, but also they instituted the Feast of Purim, which was a recognition of God's deliverance of the Jews from this wicked and governmental extermination plan led by and orchestrated by Haman the Agagite. Now, again, a character study in the book of Esther on the person of Mordecai, I think, is amazing, and I hope those questions I asked will at least help his character stand out as being along the groups of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who didn't bow when they were told to bow, for probably very similar reasons. Though Haman was not to be regarded as deity, we're not given that information, but he could not bow because he was a Jew. And similar to Joseph and Daniel, Mordecai was raised to second in the government of King Ahasuerus. So he, with two others, are unique in that situation. He was overshadowed in recognition for all the right reasons by his cousin Esther, who was queen, who took her life in her hands to go before the king, to beg the king, and to come up with a very creative and productive way to convince the king of Haman's own need for punishment. And the story of Esther, when it comes to her character, I mean, the run-up to all of those things about what she would have endured and just kind of the situations she were in is really a pretty sobering thing to think about as you think about a beautiful, young, faithful Jewish girl being brought to be one of many of the harem of this pagan king. And all through that interaction, all through that time, Mordecai, her cousin, her adopted father, cared, looked out for her, and even challenged her to be faithful to the Lord when the times were tough. So this is just a fun look, an interesting look at the study of the person of Mordecai and how God used him in the mighty deliverance of his people. Well, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today and for this time that we could look in your word. I pray that this lesson would be one that would be memorable, if for no other reason than to make the colors and the details of the way in which you've worked throughout history stand out clearly in the story of Esther. Even more so than the big picture that many of us know, but just the amazing way in which you used Mordecai and how his faithfulness to his cousin and his devotedness to you and challenging of even his cousin who was queen to be faithful to you was such an important part in your deliverance. Lord, bless us now as we have some time of fellowship. In Christ's name, amen.